We are in 2 Samuel, if you're visiting with us. We're going to be looking at chapters 5 and 6 tonight. One of the goals that Barry said that he had for this class was to try to work on like the names as well as finding Christ throughout this text, but to focus on the names, see if we can get the names down. So let's do a quick review of chapters 1 through 4 and see if we can get some of these names down. So the way I've kind of broken this down is in each of those 4 chapters, somebody kind of major dies, okay? So that's kind of going to be our benchmarks for getting through these first 4 chapters is essentially who dies in this chapter. Okay, so I want you to just shout out the the names if you know it, okay? Okay, so in chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, David hears about the deaths of Saul and Jonathan. Yeah, absolutely. So remember the Amalekite comes and tells him like, hey, I finished off Saul. And David's like, yeah, you touched the Lord's anointed, you ought to die. And then David laments over Saul and Jonathan, has this poem he writes, this song he writes in lamentation over their deaths. Okay? That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, we have this battle of the 12 between Joab's men, who's David's commander, and Abner's men, who is the commander of Saul's armies, who now belong to Ishbosheth, right? Saul's son that becomes the king. So Abner installs him as the king. All right, so during the battle of the 12 in chapter 2, Abner kills who? Say it again? Asahel, right? Okay. Asahel, remember that whole story of like, Asahel is as swift as a gazelle and he keeps running and running, and Abner's like, don't do it, I'm going to kill you if you get any closer, and he ends up killing him, okay? That was a very short, Michael condensed version of that. Chapter 3, if you're visiting, we're in 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel, we're going to be in chapters 5 and 6 tonight. We're doing a quick review. Okay, chapter 3, Joab, Asahel's brother, and remember also David's nephew. He's one of the sons of Zeruiah, those bloodthirsty men. Who does he kill in chapter 3? Abner. Say it with confidence. So he kills Abner in chapter 3, right? Why does he kill Abner? See above. Yeah, because Abner killed Asahel, right? We got all of the A names. And we're going to see more of them. Remember, because Abner killed Asahel, even though he didn't do it on purpose, Joab takes his revenge, goes and has his little secret meeting with Abner and stabs him right in the gut, right? And David's furious about it, and he's like, this was not my doing. I can't believe that you did this. But then he ends up not really doing anything about Joab. Everybody with me on that? Okay, and then chapter 4, David hears about whose death after that? Yeah, Ishbosheth. Okay, so remember those 2 men come and they kill Ishbosheth. They stab him in the belly, and then they go take his head to David, and they're like, hey, Ishbosheth is dead. Isn't that great? And David's like, no, it's not great. You killed an innocent man, so you deserve to die. Okay, so 4, 5 if you count Saul and Jonathan separate, but 4 kind of big deaths that happen through these first 4 chapters. And we get David's reaction to each one of them. When an innocent man dies, David is like, this is not right. He's trying to paint a picture of unity for the kingdom and show them that innocent men ought not die, right? Okay, so that's kind of our review of the first 4 chapters there. And then Barry last week talked a little bit about chapters 5 through 10 as kind of a chunk. What did we say was like, what is this time period for David in chapters 5 through 10? Yeah, it's his heyday. It's the peak of his reign, right? This time where like he kind of almost can do no wrong. Which we're going to see tonight, he does maybe a little bit of wrong. But this is the time where he's like military conquest after military conquest. He's the new Joshua. He's wiping out all the foreigners that ought to have been wiped out years ago. He's bringing spiritual restoration to Israel. So this is kind of a time where everything's going great in David's life. Okay? And then we talked a little bit about verses 1 through 5 with Barry last week, where Israel kind of comes to David and they're like, hey, we know you've been fighting all our battles. We know that you've kind of been doing a lot better for us than Saul has all along, but we want you to be king now. Like, kind of this awkward moment with them, like, we've always liked you, David. Will you be king now? Okay. And obviously David agrees. Yea, David is finally king over all of Israel. This anointing that has happened all the way back in 1 Samuel 16, he is finally there. Okay, he's king over all of Israel. Everybody with me on all that? Anything I missed? Okay, so we're in 2 Samuel chapter 5. And we're going to start in verse 6, and that's going to be the beginning of our text for tonight. So read with me, starting in 2 Samuel 5, verse 6. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, you will not come in here, but the blind and lame will ward you off, thinking David cannot come in here. Nevertheless, he took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. And David said on that day, whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. And David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built the city all around from the Milo inward. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees, also carpenters and masons who built David a house. And David knew that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. And David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. And these are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhiah, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. We got it. Thank you. Okay, so we see there in verses 6 through 10 that David conquers Jerusalem. I think it is sometimes easy to forget that Jerusalem is this pagan city in the midst of all of Israel, right? It's right in the middle of the land, all this land that they have supposedly conquered. But the Jebusites, one of the peoples that God specifically tells them, like, you got to wipe these guys out, are still living in that. So what does that speak to as far as Jerusalem goes? Think it was pretty hard to get into Jerusalem? Yeah, so if nothing else, it speaks to the natural defenses that we're going to see Jerusalem have for a really long time. It's not an easy place to conquer because why? A city built on a hill, right? What Jesus talks about way later. It's the idea that, like, you got to scale a mountain. If you have the high ground, it's way easier to kill these guys than if you have the low ground. Yes, sir.
Doesn't it say that Caleb at one time took the city, but the lack of faith of the Israelites did not maintain it as the city it should have been. So evidently the Jebusites weren't totally killed, that they remained there. And it's one of the places that they mentioned that the giants did.
Yeah, I think you might be thinking of Hebron, where David reigns at first. That's the place that Caleb goes in and wipes out all the people he takes as his inheritance. But we could definitely look into that and see. But notice also that Jerusalem, does anybody know what tribe it's in? This is kind of a Bible trivia question. What tribe is Jerusalem in? Benjamin, yeah. So why would that be significant for David taking a Benjaminite, whatever the word is there, city? Yeah, it goes back to Saul. It goes back to David kind of showing his unifying approach to all of this. He's not trying to go all the way down to the southern tip of Judah and say, like, this is the new capital, everybody. You got to come all the way down here to meet me. He's meeting everybody in the middle, kind of a central point, saying, hey, this place that used to be my, like, enemy's land, this is where it's going to be the capital now. Okay? Thoughts on that? Okay, so then notice verse 12. I thought this verse 12 was really cool, just thinking about everything that we've studied so far for the past 3.5 months. You think about everything that's happened in David's life since 1 Samuel 16 when he was anointed, right? He faces all sorts of trials, all sorts of tests from God. Saul chases him everywhere. And even after Saul dies, there's all this civil unrest. But then verse 12, and David knew that the Lord had established him king over Israel and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. It just makes me think about a lesson for us in God's timing. God's timing is perfect, and all these tests, all they have done for David is shape him and make him into the shepherd king that he's going to be, right? So finally this moment is realized of David knows that anointing from when I was just a kid, finally we're here. That's kind of a cool moment to me in 2 Samuel. And then after that, notice verses 13 through 16. We've kind of already talked about this. How is that section kind of show David's life as a blessing? What does that indicate? Talks about more wives and more children. How is that a blessing? Is it not a blessing? It's absolutely a blessing, right? In that the text is kind of showing like his household is building, right? More wives, more children, more kind of like David's house is growing. Saul's house is being picked off one by one. No more kids for Saul, right? They're all dying, but David's house is multiplying and growing. Okay? Now, what about the flip side of that we've already talked about? What's the problem in this text? Why are there bad omens? Yeah, so Deuteronomy 17. Let's go ahead and just look there really quick. Deuteronomy chapter 17. Deuteronomy 17:17 is talking about Israel's kings. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. Okay, so we sometimes approach David as this like perfect being that can do no wrong, but this text is pretty clearly indicating like, and he got even more wives and even more concubines, flying in the face of Deuteronomy 17. Okay, is that going to be a problem for him later? You betcha. So we've already seen before, right? Like when it listed the kids that were born to him in Hebron, right? Like Adonijah, Ammon, Absalom. We're going to see all those guys come up later, and they're going to be royal pains in David's side. But same thing here. Who's listed among here that's kind of not necessarily a problem child, but he's going to come up later. Yeah, Solomon, and how he is born is kind of a bit of a mess, right? Okay, so that's verses 6 through 16. What other thoughts do you have on that?
I've always wondered why David felt the need to do such, knowing what's right, what's wrong. I've always, the influence that he has with Solomon is going to be, Solomon has seen that his father, he had like 300 concubines.
Yeah, absolutely. David seemingly clearly has a weakness for women, as we're going to find out later. But also, what could be another reason for collecting more wives and concubines?
Reform treaties with other
Yeah, absolutely. So political reasons to give him more power through these marriages. I think David probably absolutely used that as a reason as well.
Well, he's also uniting the kingdom again, so it's not just something to do outside the nation, it's something to do inside the nation.
Sure. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next set of verses there, 17 through 25. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. Why? Why did they go up to search for David? He's been a giant pain in their rear ends for a while, right? He's been a big problem for them, and now that he's king, they're like, okay, we got to hunt this guy down. That's public enemy number one. But David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Verse 18. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim, and David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. And David came to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, the Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breaking flood. Therefore, the name of that place is called Baal Perazim. And the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. And the Philistines came up yet again and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, you shall not go up. Go around to their rear and come against them opposite the balsam trees. And when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself, for then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines. Then David did as the Lord commanded him and struck down the Philistines from Geba to Gezer. Okay, so Philistines are defeated at this place called Baal Perazim. So Baal kind of might weird you out a little bit, but like, wait a second, I thought Baal was named for this idol, right? So Baal, the word literally means master or Lord. Okay, so what David is saying here, when he calls the city, this place, which was a super common thing in the Old Testament, right? Like, because this happened here, the name of this place now is going to be Baal Perazim. Same thing in this country, it's just all the cities have been named by now, right? Someone could probably teach me the origins of Nashville, who Nashville is named after. I bet I know somebody who could do that. Say it again. John Nash. Okay. But anyway, the text itself means the master of breaking through. So clearly, in some way in this fight, David might have been in a tight spot in some sort of corner, and God breaks through in some way. He kind of breaks the chains of the Philistines. Kind of a cool moment there. Notice also in verse 21, what's significant about verse 21?
Philistines would bring their idols into battle with them, hoping that they would bluff, and they could completely abandon them, and then David takes them and carries them off.
Yeah, so it's kind of a reversal of all the way back, remember, in 1 Samuel 4 through 7, that whole story of like, hey, we're going to trot out the ark out here as a good luck charm to come help us save the day at the Battle of Aphek. You remember that? And that's kind of their good luck charm, and God says, like, I'm not with you today. And the Philistines carry off the quote-unquote idol, right? And they win the day. Well, now we're full scale, new guys in charge, things are going right for Israel, and who's carrying away the idols now? The Israelites. Kind of a cool reversal there. Continued military success for David, as we're going to keep seeing, but so anti-Saul here in this text, right? What are some things you see in this text that are so different from what Saul was like? Yeah, absolutely. The guy, remember, his name is like the king asked for, like his name literally means asked for, but he didn't really ask God very often for things. Yeah, David multiple times in this text is like, should I do this? And God says, do it this time. Don't do it this time. Do this instead. And David has success. Is that what you're going to say, Jared? Notice also, he actually has success against the Philistines. I don't think there was one time where Saul, maybe a battle or two, but the Philistines have become a real problem in Israel by the point of David's reign. And David actually is having success against them, whereas Saul really never did. Okay, so that's chapter 5. What thoughts do you have on that? Yeah.
Makes me wonder about the men carrying off the idols a little bit. Clearly it was a practice of the time to keep your enemy's idols as kind of like a trophy of military conquest. And this makes you wonder how often that those trophies eventually became a foil to them and they actually started worshiping them, as we see them just have problems with idols for years and years. I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. What else? Okay, chapter 6. I think this is going to be a story we all know fairly well, have heard a lot of times, but there's some really, really good lessons for us in there. So chapter 6 is all about the ark finally returning to its rightful place as part of this national worship, right? And then David's work in restoring it to that place. But I want you to notice before we go in that this narrative, let's see here, notice how it parallels and contrasts with the story that we just talked about in 1 Samuel 4 through 7. Okay, so let's review that story really quick, the Battle of Aphek, back in 1 Samuel 4 through 7. So if you remember God comes to Samuel and he's like, hey, nice to meet you, Samuel. I'm about to do something that's going to make the ears of everyone who hears it tingle. Okay, and he's like, and Eli's house is going to be wiped out that day, and everybody in Israel is just going to be like, wow, I can't believe that happened. Okay, and that story we were just talking about where they trot the ark into battle with them, thinking it's going to save them, and the ark is taken, right? Who takes the ark? Philistines. And that day, Eli's sons are killed. Remember that? Okay, so that's the first thing that happens. And then after that, the ark is taken to Philistia, right? Remember the whole story of the decapitated idol, and they try to make God be subjected to their gods, but God's like, I'm God, and he brings tumors and rats on the people, and all these bad plagues happen to them until finally the ark returns on a new cart, right? Remember, they've got the two cows that don't go back to their young. They go and they're like, if the cows go exactly to the Israelite town, then we know it's from God. And the cows don't stray at all, one way or the other. They go right to that Israelite town. Remember that? Everybody with me there? Okay, and then notice the second part of C. And I know this is a little tedious, but it's really cool how this connects, okay? Israel sins regarding the ark. So it goes to the city of Kiriath Jearim, and some people kind of go a little Indiana Jones on the ark, right? And they're like, I wonder what's inside. Let's take a peek. And what happens to all those guys? Dead, right? Some texts say 70 people, some say a whole lot more than that, okay? But all these men die, and they're like, oh, we don't want the ark either. Even though we're Israel, we don't want the ark. So they bring it to this place, the house of Abinadab, okay? And that is where the ark is going to stay for a really long time, okay? Over 100 years, probably. All throughout Saul's reign, that's where it is. Throughout the beginning of David's reign, that's where the ark is. And finally, we're at this point where it's like, all right, time for the ark to come back home. Okay, but I want you to notice how this is going to kind of be a reversal of the Battle of Aphek. Okay, so if we go backwards now, the ark is going to return on a new cart, which we're going to notice quickly, right? Red flag, this shouldn't be happening. But the ark returns on a new cart, and Israel sins regarding the ark, right? We're going to notice that whole deal with Uzzah and David not doing the proper due diligence that he should have done. Okay, and then what happens is the ark is taken to Obed-Edom's house, who is a Gittite. And when you're a Gittite, that means you're from Gath. Okay, so the ark is kind of taken to Philistia a little bit. Okay, you see that? And then finally the ark is restored to the tabernacle. And we're going to notice at the end of that, if we have time, the house of Saul is going to be destroyed and that Michael has no more children. Okay? So, if you didn't know this before and you don't absorb it, that's okay. But the reason I bring this up is because I think it is so stinking cool that God could have organized this text, this narrative, any way that he wanted to, but he chose to use this kind of as a literary device to show that he is undoing the embarrassment of the Battle of Aphek. He's like, you guys royally screwed it up and you've just kind of been sitting in this shame for years. Well, we're going to kind of slowly unravel that and finally be back to where we're good again. And the ark is where it belongs. Okay? Thoughts on that? Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the story then. Read with me verses 1 through 8. Verses 1 through 8. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died beside the ark of the Lord. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. Okay. So, one of those stories that makes us all just a teeny tiny bit uncomfortable, right? Because I know we probably all know the answer to this, but there's that little part in you that's like, wait a second, was that fair? Was that like, Uzzah's trying to like grab the ark and save it? God, why would you strike him down because of that? Yeah, absolutely. It could have just been like, whoops. Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about this first. What went wrong here? How could this not, like, this is an amazing thing that David's like, let's get the ark back to Jerusalem, not back to Jerusalem, but to Jerusalem. We're going to set up this national worship. Everybody can come. Outsiders can come and see our worship and this amazing thing. What's going on here? What's wrong?
Well, first they didn't consult the Lord, like, Lord, how do you want your treasured possession to be carried?
Yeah, absolutely. So how did he want him to carry it?
Always through the rings.
Yeah. So he wants them to carry it first with the poles, right, where they're carrying it on their shoulders. And who's doing that? The Levites, absolutely. Okay, so that's the big red flag here, is that the Levites are the ones that are supposed to be carrying this, and they're supposed to be carrying it on their shoulders. Does that feel a little ticky-tacky to you? A little part inside of you where you're like, really, God? They're trying to do a good thing here. So what I love about this text is David kind of feels that way too, seemingly, right? God gets angry and he strikes out against Uzzah, and then David gets angry right after that, and he's like, in my mind, he's thinking like, are you serious? Are you serious that you're going to strike him down over something like this? And so what does he do with the ark after that? I guess we didn't read that far. Well, one more point for that. God breaks out against the Philistines in chapter 5. Remember we saw that word, that Perez root word? And then he breaks out against Uzzah. So what's kind of the point there that the text is making? Same treatment. Even if you're one of God's people, if you don't treat his presence the right way, you're going to get broken out against, okay? So we're going to talk about that more, lessons on that more. But just sit in that feeling for a second, if you would, just to like, really, God? Because David sat in that feeling for a second where he was angry, and he takes the ark, and he's like, all right, we're putting it in somebody else's house. He even says, let's see, read in verse 9 with me. And David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? He's like, somebody who's got this incredible personal relationship with God is like, I don't think this ark can come to me because it's just, this was too much for me that day, okay? So just sit in that for a second. And then let's read on, starting in verse 9. Or we already read verse 9, starting in verse 10. So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David, but David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. Now, I haven't read a lot of commentaries about why he took it there. Part of you wonders, like, he takes it to the house of a Philistine, not expecting good things to happen, perhaps. But read on. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. And it was told King David, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of the Lord, of God. And David went up and brought the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. Okay, so we get a little bit more context for this in 1 Chronicles. It's telling of this in chapter 15. We're not going to look at it tonight, but David essentially says, he kind of has this epiphany where it's like the reason that this didn't work the first time is because we didn't seek God. Anybody remember? Seek him according to the law, right? They didn't consult the law beforehand about this, and he's like, it has to be Levites. They have to have poles on their on the shoulders, and they do it the right way, and there's much rejoicing, right? Let me catch up on my notes here. So David hears that Obed-Edom is blessed, which is kind of a sign to David that, like, okay, maybe he's not mad at us collectively. Maybe he was just mad about this one moment. Okay, and then David's like, let's do this again. Let's do this the right way. So it's certainly a striking story for us to consider. But I want to sit in that tension and think about, why would God do this? Because there's obviously a reason that God chose to strike Uzzah down. So let's talk about that. What does it say about God in this text that he is willing to strike someone down that touches the ark? Sir.
It's, God says that kind of giving a wake-up call, because we're human, and so we kind of need a wake-up call. So God's like striking one person, so then we get to thinking, why would the Lord do this? So then we got to go back to the text and see, oh, then we did this the wrong way. So it's God's trying to get you to go back.
Yeah, so to that point, I love that. Where else has he done that in Scripture? Where somebody does something they ought not have done, and he just goes, boom, you're dead.
Nadab and Abihu.
What, David? Yeah, Nadab and Abihu, okay? Where else does he do it in the New Testament? Ananias and Sapphira. Okay, so what's the similarity between those 3 things?
Disobedience.
Okay, yeah. Were there other disobedient people that he didn't strike dead? So what's... Yeah, I would say more to that, like, it's a new era, right, for all of Israel, where, like, Nadab and Abihu, that's right at the beginning of the priesthood, okay, where he's like, I'm setting the standard now, so you know from here on out, if somebody else does something like that, I'm not necessarily going to strike them dead, but This is how I feel about it. Same kind of deal here. This is going to be the beginning of a new worship era, if you will, where worship's going to be at Jerusalem. When you do things like that, I'm not always going to necessarily strike you dead, but that's how I feel about it. Ananias and Sapphira, have there been anybody else since then that has lied about how much they give? Yeah. Did he strike them all dead? No, not necessarily, but he's setting this precedent, the standard at the beginning of the era. This is how I feel about it. Okay? Adam's giving me a...
The setting of precedent is an interesting idea. I haven't talked about that word before. To me, there's a couple things in all of these. So, in the comparative situation with Nadab and Abihu and Ananias and Sapphira, we know that they, in both cases, willfully chose to do wrong. And we don't know that about others. But I do wonder if that's just because we don't have enough of the story. Because it's interesting to compare it to the other stories where we absolutely know that they know what they were doing.
I don't think David would be angry if Uzzah was doing this willfully. Perhaps. Continue.
But to me, it's maybe this goes with the point we're making about the new era concept, but to me, part of this is, in a ironic sort of way, this highlights concepts of God's mercy and grace. In that all around us every day, there are people that are sinning, and God has the right to punish them. He did not do anything in these cases that was outside righteousness. He provides paths for forgiveness and mercy and grace to all of us, and he doesn't have to. So to me, that's part of what all these kind of example stories highlight is we should be grateful. For most of us, almost all of the time, God doesn't deal with us in this way. He deals with us with grace and mercy. But that's not because he lacks the right to treat us in the same way.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah.
This is maybe like half of my thought, but they put the ark on a new cart. So God doesn't strike them dead or strike us dead for breaking the laws unilaterally, if that makes sense. Like there's kind of a point where they've already gone outside of the law, but there's been no consequence yet. And that kind of makes me wonder, okay, well, if Uzzah doesn't touch the ark at that moment, does the ark make it all the way back on the cart as long as they take it off the cart without touching it? It's fine, or what happens? And that's kind of hypothetical. But I guess what I'm saying is, it seems significant that he actually touches it, almost as if hey, you guys are bringing the ark back. This is my presence coming back into Jerusalem. Don't take that for granted. It's not normal to be able to have this relationship. If you take it for granted, I think that's maybe that idea, but because of touching it, if you take it for granted, you're going to abuse it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of swirling ahead.
I was reading something that kind of compared it to like how could God kill Uzzah? Well, if you touch the sun, you're going to get burned, right? It's not so much that the sun has any malice towards you, but more the fact that the sun is the sun, and it's an enormous amount of heat. So what's the comparison? There's such holiness with God that if you touch him in an unholy way, you're going to get burned. Yeah, Jared.
Yeah, that was actually what I was going to bring up as well. Just the ark was meant to be this utmost holy symbol to them, and they were treating it as something so common, with neglect in a way. And so it's kind of a wake-up call for them to be God is serious about this, and it's not something to be treated so casually or so commonplace as cargo, or just another trophy.
Absolutely. Somebody else had a hand.
When I read this story, something that jumps off the page to me, all these great comments. But to me, this is not the first mistake or the second. Matter of fact, this problem with the ark, my first question is why did they not have proper care of the ark?
Yeah,
And that, so
absolutely.
the application here, big application to me is, where was the generation that was told that they were to teach their children,
Yeah,
to teach those laws? To the point that even though the ark was gone for decades, they
absolutely.
should have known what the ark was and who God is, to where when they saw it, it would have been like, don't touch it.
Right.
No one touch it. No one touch it. We found it, and go get the priests, and everyone should have known exactly what that symbolized, what that represented, and the consequences to that.
Yeah.
So
Speak to the
how
lack
does
of
that
knowledge.
apply to us today?
Sure.
And the fact that Uzzah made a mistake, but we can see the result of our sins and mistakes of how that happens generationally.
Yeah,
And it doesn't matter where our heart is. If we're breaking God's law and we're worshiping Him correctly, it's not acceptable.
yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I think some correlation, like kind of pulling all that together. I think the Lord gave precise instructions on how it should be handled.
Yeah.
Same way He gave Noah precise instructions on how to build an ark.
Right.
Noah did exactly. He didn't do exactly, then we can, surmise what could have happened, otherwise. Here they didn't handle the ark the way it's supposed to, and now we see God's reaction to it. Same way, it's God's going to personify in an object. The same way when Moses was before the burning bush, he said, "You're on holy ground. Take your sandals off. Don't touch it. Only with my allowance."
Yeah.
They clearly work better.
Absolutely. So it speaks a lot to, this is what a lesson for us in that you can have all the zeal in the world, and that's not enough, right? Because David, anybody have a problem with David's zeal here? Like, it's amazing that he's so excited about the ark going to Jerusalem, but he doesn't have the knowledge. So quickly, David's responsible for this as well, right? The fact that he let all this happen. He says in 1 Chronicles 15, we let this happen, including himself in it. So leaders, you're accountable for even well-intentioned actions. Okay? Huge point for us here. God cares about how he's worshipped. But I also want, on the flip side of that, we can go so far on that to say, if we had like a zeal and a knowledge bar, we say like David's got this much zeal and this much knowledge. So what we need to do is we need to chop that zeal in half and put it in the knowledge column. Does that make sense? You get what I'm saying there? When really, what should David do? He should have the zeal column and the knowledge column. Keep up that zeal, keep up that enthusiasm for worshiping God, David, but supplement that with God's holiness, the knowledge that you have to approach him in a certain way. So application for us majorly is don't sacrifice your zeal for the knowledge, because we can be just like David in the opposite way oftentimes, where we've got the knowledge, we've got the right ways to do it, but the zeal is down here. Same situation as David. Okay? It's just as dangerous as what David has. But we can also be in that opposite category just like they are, where we've got way too much zeal and we've got not enough knowledge. So something for us to think about, that balance there. Really not balance. Both of them should be striving towards quote-unquote 100%. Okay, we'll pick up in verse 16 with Barry next Wednesday. Thank you, guys.